Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to For StarCraft 2 Strategy, where we teach you to be pro at gaming and a pro at life. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Protoss strategy. This is going to be a mirror matchup, so we're looking at Protoss versus Protoss. Basically, the strategy that we're looking at in this particular build is that 2 Warp Gate into Robotics Facility to get Immortals out. This is going to be a good response to the basically standard Protoss build in mirror matchups in Protoss versus Protoss in the 4 Warp Gate. 4 Warp Gate is basically what all Protoss players do against one another. And instead of going for that 4 Warp Gate again, we're going to go for 2 Warp Gates and a Robotics Facility to get Immortals. Now, Immortals are going to be very, very strong versus Stalkers, and Stalkers typically end up being the bulk of the army and what you see in Protoss versus Protoss. So in this particular strategy replay, the Protoss player we're looking at is Night End, and our Protoss opponent is Mana. We're going to go ahead and go straight into Night End Vision now. So the build that we're looking at, the particular build order, we're starting off, of course, with that 9 Pylon, following it up with the 12 Gateway. So pretty standard stuff. As soon as we get 150 minerals, that's when we're going to see that 12 Gateway drop. Now we are moving out our Scout here to try to get some scouting information. And now I must say the good thing about mirror matchups is this is probably the easiest matchup for most players to figure out what their opponent is doing. Because obviously, if you're playing against the race that you typically play, you're going to know generally when things should be going down and what should be going on. And I'm sorry, we did go for this 14 Gateway in this particular build here. So we're just kind of postponing things here. And something I do want to say is that going for the slightly delayed build as opposed to your opponent allows 2 things to happen. It allows you to respond to what your opponent's doing exactly, and it also allows you to get that slight economic advantage. Basically how it works is that extra time that you spend gathering before you move a probe out to build a building is going to be that much more resources that you have than your opponent. Now it's only slight, it's only a little bit more, but it is more nonetheless. You do get a little bit more of a resource advantage than your opponent by moving out slightly later than they do. And that's essentially the theory in all mirror matchups. That's kind of, if you can manage to do that, if you can build your buildings slightly later than your opponent does, you're going to have a little bit of an advantage. And some people may say it's insignificant and minuscule. It is a tiny advantage, but it's an advantage nonetheless. And especially in a game like this, where it really comes down to the numbers, that's any slight advantage you can get is really beneficial to you. So as you can see here, we are dropping our Cybernetics core to 24. And that is, of course, later than our opponent. Our opponent has a Cybernetics core up right now, and ours is just starting to build. And again, the whole theory is that slight advantage that you're going to get economically by just delaying things just a little bit. We are dropping our second assimilator right now because we are going to need gas. Again, the build that we're going for is that 2 Warp Gate and Robotics Facility into Immortal. And we will see later in the game, once we do finally get to some fighting action, how strong Immortals are versus Stalkers. They absolutely devastate them. They do so well versus them. And that's why this build can work, because again, typically the bulk of the army that you see in PvP matchups is Stalkers. And getting these Immortals is going to be a nice strong counter to that. It's going to be a nice strong response to that. Now, we aren't negating our Warp Gate tech just because we're going for this Robotics Facility. We're just delaying it slightly. Basically, we saved up all of our Vespian, and as soon as we could, we dropped that Robotics Facility. And then once that was done, once we started building that Robotics Facility, we went ahead and started researching that Warp Gate research. As you can see, we are coming up with our second Gateway right now. In the meantime, while we're waiting for our box facility, we do of course want to create units, just because these aren't warp gates doesn't mean we can't use them. So we're going to use our normal gateways to come up with units. As you can see here, we do have a couple zealots and a sentry. Keeping this probe down here to get that scouting information. So now, as you can see, due to that vision, we do see that an attack is coming. We also saw that probe there that tells us that we're likely to be getting a proxy pylon somewhere outside of our base. Of course, we did find the one that was over here, and we destroyed it, obviously. We don't want them to give them any advantage when it comes to warping any units close to our base. But we do know that a push is likely to be coming. We saw a Stalker and a Zealot move out, as well as a probe. The probe was obviously there to draw proxy pylons to help reinforce an attack. So we know an attack's coming, so now we're preparing for it. We're making sure we're getting up units. We're dropping down our pylons so we don't become supply blocks, obviously. And we're coming out with that Immortal. That Immortal is kind of going to be the backbone against our defense and our attack. It's going to be it's like a trump card. It's what we're using to overcome our opponent. And again, as you can see, they're moving out with that standard PvP mix of mostly Stalkers. That's mostly Stalkers. That's what you typically end up seeing. obviously, except for the early game, if you get early game pushes, that's typically all zealots. But in the late early to mid game, you see mostly stalkers and Protoss versus Protoss, and you having this immortal, it's really gonna help you and put a lot of benefit in your favor. Now he does end up taking out this one immortal, but not without damage. He did lose a stalker there, took a lot of damage on this other stalker, and we're going to be pushing forward here, and this is definitely going to be way too much for him to handle. So the benefit of what we're doing in this particular strategy is, of course, getting those immortals to respond to stalkers and delaying that building production slightly. And that's something, again, I want to repeat, that if you can, obviously don't completely throw off your build times. Obviously don't start building your first gateway at like 30 supply when you're fully saturated and you have nothing at all and don't even have your first gateway. But just that slight delay is going to give you a little bit of an economic advantage, and that can really turn the tide of battle in your favor. Now, obviously, on the flip side of that, it does put you at a somewhat vulnerable position early on in the game. If he pushes really early, you may not have your buildings up in time to prevent an attack or to counter an attack. But with proper scouting information, you should know if an attack is coming early on in the game. We, of course, did have the probe in his base, so we did see that he was still in his base and wasn't moving out with an attack. So as you can see there, I mean, that was just ridiculous. The Immortals, coupled with our standard gateway mix here, completely dominated everything that our Protoss opponent had. That's typically what you should expect with this Immortal build. Immortals, again, so strong. And of course, sticking with these two gateways as of now, not getting any more because we really can't afford it based off this one base play. We did go ahead and drop a Stargate, and we're going to be using that to get a Phoenix, basically to allow us to do some additional harass, and to overcome whatever our opponent may have. What we're going to be using is the Graviton Beam, just to basically lift off any of his forces, to just give us that little bit of an edge in the battle upcoming. So, moving forward, our Immortals housing on these Stalkers as much as possible. Definitely kind of want to make sure that you target fire the Stalkers with them. You really don't want them attacking the Zealots, as they are not nearly as effective versus Zealots as they are versus Stalkers. Pushing forward, we don't really want to get surrounded by the probe, so we are pulling them back, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Using this Phoenix just to lift off, and lifting off that one unit can really swing the battle. That one Stalker being on the ground could have been enough for him to overcome the forces we had, but lifting it off, basically turning the tide in our favor. Mana saying how annoying PvP is. I'm pretty much going to say for any race, for any player, the mirror matchup is the most annoying to deal with. For the most part, because again, your opponent has all the same capabilities you do. Everything's the same. It's just a matter of how you do things, down to a fine point, basically. I don't know if I'm making much sense. It's pretty late tonight, but I really wanted to come out with the videos for you guys, so going to be doing this. So again, this was a Protoss versus Protoss strategy, and what we looked at specifically was that 2-gate and Rebox facility to counter that 4-gate pressure from your opponent, that 4-gate build. Taking a look at everything view here, you can see additional 2 warp gates there, and that's basically what he went all in, and that's a lot of what you're going to see in PvP is that 4-gate push. So we're going to be using those 2 warp gates in addition to the Immortals getting from this Rebox facility to counteract that. So again, guys, this has been 4 StarCraft 2 strategy. Quick little review of that build order there. Went with that 9 pylon, dropped that 14 gateway, the slight delay behind what our opponent did, again for that economic advantage. Then, of course, we went ahead and got our Cybernetics core. Now, we did have one assimilator at that point. After this Cybernetics core was built, we dropped our second assimilator. And then, as soon as we had enough Espion, we went ahead and dropped that Rebox facility. Of course, constantly producing stuff out of our gateways. In the meantime, to fend off any early pressure and to just make sure that we're not going to get rushed and wiped out really early on in the game. And then, of course, as soon as that Rebox facility finished building, we went ahead and started producing our Immortals. Pushed out from there. Definitely want to make sure you're on top of your micro. Make sure you use these Immortals to attack the Stalkers and not the Zealots or the Sentries. Of course, because they do that additional damage versus armored, and of course Stalkers are armored. So yeah, again guys, this has been 4 StarCraft 2 strategies. If you like our videos and you like what we're doing here, please do go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Keep watching and keep owning, guys. So moving forward here, and this is going to be the vital part of the strategy. You really need to make sure you're pretty strong on micro in order to implement this properly. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for you. They're going to do a ton of damage to you. You need to make sure again that you're able to pull back your units.